Hello and welcome to Make It Work, the bi-weekly podcast where we uncover inspiring stories of modern working mamas in Asia who have redefined their career paths whilst putting family first.
Hi folks, welcome back to Make It Work Asia. I'm your host, Sarah Wong. Today, I'm stoked to welcome my friend Karen Tay on our episode. Karen is a Singaporean transplant in San Francisco, USA, and a mom of two. She is the founder of Inherent, a platform dedicated to supporting women through career transitions and workplace challenges. In our intimate conversation today, Karen shares her journey from being a senior public servant in the Singapore government to joining corporate America to becoming an entrepreneur. We discuss her viral Her World article entitled Modern Motherhood, The Blessings of Not Having It All. We revisit some of her darkest times in her personal and professional life and her lessons since coming out of it. Join us as we also reflect on the collective learnings in her work in supporting women through workplace adversity and uncover some enduring wisdom about going through suffering and how to make impactful comebacks. Tune in. Hey, hi, Karen.
Hey, Sarah.
Hey, thanks for taking time off. I know that it's nighttime for you in San Francisco. And before anything, can you tell us about yourself in 2 minutes or less?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So I am Karen. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've lived here for 8 years, but born and raised in Singapore. Spent the first half of my career there, and now I think more than half of my career has been spent in the Bay Area. My husband, he is a data scientist, researcher out here, so very tech, and we have two children, Talia and Eden. They're almost 6 and 8. So I recently left corporate America to set up my own company. I have a consulting practice where I work with lots of tech CEOs in Singapore and also the Bay Area to strengthen their teams, coach their teams, help them to deliver through people. And I'm also running a startup called Inherent that helps to reach more of the mass market of women who really struggle with career transitions, challenging workplace situations, and really figure out how to scale support in that respect. So it's been a lot of fun doing these two things and enjoying my flexibility as owning my own businesses now.
Great. Well, thanks, Karen. I think you've straddled so many kinds of barriers or, differences like in region, you were in public sector, you went to private, now you're starting your own business. Maybe you can give us a sense of how your day in a life looks like today and how you do everything you do.
Well, yeah, living in the US, definitely my day includes quite a lot of mundane things. So we send our kids to school every day, pick them up every day. I do all the cooking. My husband does all the cleaning. And we in between. So we wake up and get them ready, send them off, and then we start work. I have days where I work many time zones. I have London, Singapore, and Bay Area, New York. So I try to space out my day. For example, tonight I have tons of work calls at night. I try to pack them all in at night. And in the day, I try to spend more time on creative work, like writing, creating content. I'm designing a workshop for our students next week. So, trying not to have like a day which lasts 15 hours, I think. Some days in the day, if I have really late work calls, I also do pottery in the day, right? So that I'm not constantly thinking about work or I'm putting my mind to something else or volunteering. So right now is a season where I really break up my time intentionally to spend on different clients across different time zones and have my own time and have time with my kids. So yeah.
Do you have any kind of, software that you use to help you plan out your day, or you have certain principles you live by to, make your day as less crazy as possible, I guess?
Well, I do a lot of calendar blocking. So at the start of the week, I block time. I need to work on this thing, right? If this is deep work, I need 2 hours to work on it. I know now. I used to work in corporate, right? So 10 meetings a day. And then when do you think? You don't actually think, right? So now that I have more autonomy over my time, I'm like, okay, from 5 p.m. to 8 to 10 p.m. tonight, I have calls. And then in the day, I block 3 hours to work on deep work for my workshop, right? And then I block 3 hours to work on the admin I need to do for this and that contract. Another 3 hours to do interviews for that client. So that's how I do it. I just calendar block, very low tech, but it helps me to know and see my week. And I've really learned to manage my energy. I used to be able to go back to back all the way, but now I'm like, I can't do more than 4 calls back to back. Yeah. So I think that's just, yeah.
So you mentioned something earlier that's interesting. You mentioned pottery, and this is something that I've heard from another pretty successful entrepreneur say she does as well. Is what is it about pottery that you give time to do? Because I know it can take quite a lot of time, right?
Yeah. Well, I think precisely because my husband says that like you always have a thousand different things you're doing, and my mind is like that. I enjoy variety. I enjoy the thinking about many different problems. But there are times when my brain just needs to stop and do something totally different. So I thought pottery was one of those things like you can walk and think about stuff, but it's not. You actually have to pay attention to something wholly different from what you normally think about. Like if you don't think properly or if you don't focus, your thing will fall apart. So I find that a really great way to just use a different part of my mind, creative, beauty, free form, figure it out. I'm not very structured with it, but I really enjoy it. Yeah.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, it sounds like it helps you engage a different sense, right? You're using your hand, and then you're also engaging a different part of your brain. Do you find that doing pottery, for example, you get like eureka moments for other parts of your life, like maybe some coaching challenge that your CEO is going through? Like, does that happen during that time?
I think certainly it does. I think it's a very somatic exercise. So I think even for myself, if I'm not kind of in a good place, I'm not centered, it's very hard to center a piece of clay. It's so cheesy, but it's true. I think it's a very good reflection for myself on, where my mind is at and being able to check in with myself on that. So there have been weeks consecutively where was unable to center something or build something that normally comes like easily to me. And that's when I knew like, okay, I need to kind of pay attention to calming down a little bit and like getting back into a centered state of mind. So that's one example.
Yeah, very interesting. You can have like exhibition one day of like the different seasons in your life seen through your pottery pieces or something like that.
Yes, you can definitely see. You can definitely see. Yeah.
Same. Well, okay. So as you know, this podcast is reaching out to a lot of working moms, and we want to hear about how you becoming a mom impacted your perspective in your approach to work. And I know that the time that you spend overseas in the US has also contributed a lot to that. Yeah, can you just tell us a little bit?
Yeah. So I became a mom in 2016 and we moved to the US when my kid was 5 months old. I think if you saw me until that point, the way that I thought about my life was very much optimizing it. So can you have this and that and this and just have the most efficient way of doing all of that? But
Yeah, sounds very Singaporean.
Singapore, extremely Singaporean. But like, yeah, moving here just was the ultimate inefficient thing to do on many fronts. There's not much childcare here. Everything is more expensive. Family's not here. So it really challenged my paradigms. And I was very frustrated for a long time. I was like, it's not worth it. It's not worth moving here. And the background is one of the primary reasons was that my husband wanted to do his PhD at Stanford. So I thought, oh, that's a great adventure. And then I had a kid and I was like, okay, this is not so much of a great adventure. This is very difficult for me. But at the same time, there was another part of me that really liked the fact that I was limited. I really liked the fact that I could have an excuse to see my kid more. And I was like, wow, sometimes you underestimate how much other parts of us come out when these big life circumstances happen. Right. So there's this tension between like, oh man, I really want to optimize optimize everything, optimize career, optimize, investments in time and money. Also, there's this really inefficient thing, which is I want to just spend a lot of more time with my kid, but by extension, also my husband. And I think I went back and forth for a while, trying to find that balance. One other piece of surprise for us was it was really, really expensive to live here in the US. And I realized he wouldn't be able to make money on a grad student salary for 5 years. So I had to operate within quite tight constraints, like making this amount of money, this amount of stability, and wanting my flexibility. So those were a series of hard trade-offs. And I wrote about it, as you mentioned in the article. Yeah.
Mm. So do you feel that you've come out of it now? Or do you still feel that you oscillate between the two kind of worlds? Where do you find yourself?
Right now? Yeah. Well, I do think for younger moms is a challenge, when your kids are below 5 and your kids are below 5, right? Like there it's intensely physical and presence is very important. Presence is important now too, but it's not the same intensity. Like I wouldn't leave my husband with 2 kids alone and feel fine with that when they were below 5. And now that's just not the case anymore. Like both of us feel comfortable, right? Taking more and more of our own space. And we have that foundation of our relationship with our children. So they are really secure. I think that dilemma, the tension is particularly acute if you're a younger mom, right? Right now, I think combination of they're easier, but at an easier phase, but also I have changed. I think I have mellowed quite a bit and come to some acceptance about, the choices we've had to make and actually really enjoyed the fruit of some of the choices we made. I'm actually very happy now I don't feel pushed, in any way. I'm quite happy with the choices, especially now that I run my own business, having the flexibility. I really love it. Like, I don't want to trade off that time with them and be able to drop into their school, do volunteering, and not be, at my computer 10 hours a day from 8 to whatever, 6. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, you talked about the secretly enjoying the limits that were imposed on you being without childcare support, family support. Can you talk more about that? And then also, if you were to, go back to your younger self when you're struggling in those moments, like, "Ah, this is not worth it." Like, what would you tell yourself?
Secretly enjoying the limits, right? Like, I think this idea of quality time where, okay, parents, like, growing up in Singapore, because help is easily available. So leave the dirty work to whoever like has, more whose time is less valuable, something like that, right? This paradigm. But I I actually really enjoy showering my kids. Now, would I choose to do it every day if I could? No. Like, no, I would like, but I also don't want to fall into like, okay, just by default, someone else should do that for me, right? All these kids don't talk when you want them to talk. They talk when they want to talk. And so I think some of these more intensive uh time spent with them, just commitment again and again, doing the mundane, open up these opportunities to really, really connect with them, which I enjoy. Like, they're just little human beings who are so interesting and funny. So if I don't know if I had to tell my younger self, like, what do you mean, my 16-year-old self or my 20-year-old self or 29?
Well,
But
young, the 5-month old in San Francisco in the student accommodation when you were like, I don't know if this is the right choice. Or maybe when you had 2 kids, right? 2 young kids. Uh, I'm sure that must have been times of overwhelm and like wondering if this
yeah.
is worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe some of the greatest fruit comes from that struggle, right? Because there's all the stuff on the surface of, I want my life to look a certain way. But I think below that, it's, who am I? Like, what do I actually value? There's this existential question, and you can only really figure that out through the struggle. Sometimes I worry that if you have too easy a time, there are no trade offs in life. And do you know who you are? Do you know, like, what you really, really stand for? And my choices as a mother also made me reflect on what kind of leader I wanted to be, right? So it's a forcing function for how you show up in the world. And I think I've changed quite a bit these last 7 to 8 years. You should ask my friends, but I think I have. Yeah. I'm definitely happier now for one. Which is ironic, right? Choices would be great, but like, I think maybe making peace with your limits and having those things right in front of you that you can enjoy without deferring is in itself a joy. Yeah.
Really deep thoughts there. You wrote in that article in Her World about how you made certain choice to stay in something stable while your husband was working. And then he graduated, you felt like, okay, this was now your time to experiment on what you wanted.
Yeah, certainly. I think we had that discussion maybe 2, 3 years ago. And it's one thing to feel like, okay, I now have that freedom, and it's another to give yourself that freedom, because I actually realized that I found a lot of my identity in earning a lot of money. And, now that I didn't have to, I still want to. I think there are those defaults that you get used to, right? Like, that your identity attaches to in a certain season. And even moving towards setting up my own thing, I didn't do it immediately. I jumped to another startup. I did a bunch of consulting projects. I was really trying to optimize for the same factors as I had when I was, the breadwinner. So switching over was not easy to the new paradigm, even though I had that freedom, right? So it's interesting. Sometimes we find
And
more freedom in those constraints. And then when they're away, like, oh, okay, it feels like more pressurizing, right? So it definitely was a transition for me when I left those high paying roles and started to do something more uncertain, right? Like, not really knowing, especially when you start out, like, where's the income going to come from? And thankfully it's worked out. But again, right, like, it was not all peachy, like, oh, yeah, yeah, I'm free. I can do whatever I want. This is all great. Like, I had to adapt to that new season as well. Yeah.
yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think I pick up what you say about how in a certain time in your life, certain metrics were what you found value and worth in. And it sounds that, after becoming a mom, having the limits that were placed on you, that those changed a little bit, such that you started to think about maybe even you weighted them less. Can you talk about some of these metrics that changed and what are important to you today?
Metrics. Hmm.
You talk about like how earning a certain level was really important, which was one of the reasons why you try to optimize different kind of jobs that you were doing. And then, but then after that, you wanted to do your own startup. So was that still as important, or were there other factors that came in that you wanted to pursue as well?
I've been a coach for 8 years now, and I never intended to be a coach formally. I just took that
Mm.
training because I was really struggling with being a leader, and I was a leader very young in my career and just not prepared. And as a typical Singaporean, I was like, instead of paying a coach, I'm just going to get coach training so I can do it myself. Right. So that's how I became a coach. But I think it just pointed towards an underlying thing for me, which is I care a lot about building systems with dignity at the core, right? There are ways to do it. That's why I joined the government, because government is like you get to set the culture and a system that values people while growing the country. But I really wanted to do this for individuals. I saw a lot of people in my life struggling. I've struggled a lot myself. The transition was one thing, but there have been many other moments that have been very, very hard for me. And it's hard to find trusted support in those moments when you kind of feel like you're losing your bearings. So I always knew I wanted to do something for people in these moments of what I call critical moments, moments of
Mm.
transition, moments of adversity, moments when you feel overwhelmed and emotionally hijacked. And I think um, that's one value that really came to the forefront when I had that freedom and when I got over my concern about, making a ton of money. I have daughters as well, and as a woman navigating this role, I just wasn't really prepared for the kinds of challenges we face, right? There is this sense of, oh, you're educated, you're a new generation, you did everything the same as men, so it's going to be fine for you. But me and then all my friends around me who are like saying, "Why is this so hard? Why weren't we really prepared for some of the trade-offs we have to make?" And grasping for straws on that. So I want to set up this kind of foundation, the resources, the training, the equipping for the next generation of women, including my daughters who will grow into that. So that's something that became very important to me after being a mom.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I also wanted to hear maybe a more personal story. If you can bring us back to a time when you were at, one of your darkest moments, what brought you out, and how do you feel back then? How do you find the support that you needed?
One of them would definitely be 2020. And I was doing two jobs, one for the Smart Nation and one for Economic Development Board. And it was also in the middle of the pandemic when, crisis mode, right? We were coordinating flying Singaporeans back, students, right? Like, should we keep our officers in market? People are dropping like flies. And I was one of the most senior person overseas at the point. So really in those discussions at night and thinking about it, right? And feeling the emotions of the team, that was a very hard time for me. And I remember I actually really severely burned out in December 2020. And this was like 2 weeks after I did like a conversation with PM Lee, in front of thousands of people, tech forum. It was a really quite a big deal in the middle of the pandemic. After
Yeah.
2 weeks after that, I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't work anymore, right? Like I can't go forward. And I had no real words for it except that I was very tired. Well, thankfully, managed to get a medical leave from my position for a few months, and the team was very supportive of me. But then that was the point where we started to like pick up the pieces. Like, how did we get here? I think even though I knew I was unhappy, I didn't know I was so kind of like stretched the limit and broken by the level of pressure of raising two kids in pandemic, doing two jobs, being overseas during a really at risk time. And my husband and I had many, many difficult conversations because I remember telling him, like, did you not notice that this was happening to me? And he's like, oh, yeah, but the next moment you would seem fine. And so he's like, no, I'm not okay, right? And why didn't you notice? Why didn't you kind of initiate a change earlier? So that was a turning point for me and in our relationship as well, where, all the things that we kind of covered up and didn't talk about, we ended up talking about. And I think it was about a year after that I wrote that article when we sorted a lot of these knots out in our marriage, right? Because obviously everybody wants to make it work. I wanted to help him finish his PhD. He wanted me to be happy, but there's a ton of things you overlook. And I wouldn't underestimate kind of the deeper things that come out, right? Like, what do you take away about being a mother from from your family of origin? What do you take away about suffering or just, bearing it, responsibility to other people? And these are subconscious things. So I couldn't blame him all for it. I was just kind of swimming in that sea myself, right? And my good friends here would obviously help me find resources, to get the therapy that I needed, to figure out the medical leave policies, all of that.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that. Did you and your husband just kind of sit down and have these conversations, or were there any like books, or did you all go for counseling?
Yeah, there's one book that we really liked, and I came upon it because I was invited on a podcast with the professor who wrote it, Jennifer Petriglieri, and it's called Couples That Work. That was a good book that we discovered during the pandemic, but more or less during the pandemic because we couldn't do anything else. And I was on leave for a few weeks at that point. We went hiking like almost every day. He was done with his research by then, and we would just talk and talk and talk. And there was
Mm.
a lot of, you know, emotions involved, but it was the blessing of being stuck.
Yeah, in the forest too. I'm sure that helped.
Usually in like busy days.
Well, I'm so glad that you guys came out of it stronger, and you've had so many new, like, big revelations that have really been waymarkers as you've grown out of that. So many things have happened out of that, out of COVID. So yes, I think this is a good time to segue to hear more on, this work that you're doing to help women in adversity.
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned, I help women on the upswing and the downswing. So on the upswing, I help many female CEOs who are running high growth companies, also males, but many females, high growth companies, partners in, consulting and law, CTOs, CEOs, and that's really when they're excited and they're like, how can I use my skills, right, to forward this mission? I love that. But I also love helping people on downswings, right? Like it's both the trampoline and the safety net that helps you make sure you don't fall below a certain level, because what I experienced with burnout was really falling below a certain level of my personal reserves. And downswings happen quite common in life, right? Like workplace challenges, toxic workplaces can be that situation, or maybe you have a very intense caregiving situation and that creates the pushback at work and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? Right. So yeah, last year a friend and I set up a pilot to serve women in what we call workplace adversity. We left it open-ended, but 135 women signed up in a few weeks. We had to shut down the sign-ups and everything. And it just makes you think like, wow, they must be really desperate because we pretty much unknown at that point. So what we did was I trained allies, women like me and you, senior women with corporate experience, to really help be the first responder to women in these adverse moments. There are three things really, like be a safe listener. Don't try and say like, why didn't you do this when you do that, right? How do you be a safe listener? How do you really triage a situation and help them to know, is this urgent? Is this acute? Or is this just like you have long time to decide, right? And then we came up with action planning steps which they could choose from. And so it was a very tight process. And all the women who participated found it incredibly helpful. The net promoter score was 100. Princeton University did the before after analysis for us, and just huge impacts on women's well-being, productivity, decrease in burnout. Everything is statistically significant. So I think what I learned is just in these moments, you can't really afford to be looking around and be like, okay, who can help me? Who can help me? Like you really just need a really trusted person who has been there before, and you trust her because she's not going to judge you and be like, are you sure he said that? Are you sure that happened? Right? But you trust them enough to pull you through it. And if they have to give you a difficult opinion, they will, because you trust them. So that's something I'm really passionate about, right? Like helping people on the downswing. And now that we finished that pilot, I've also turned it into more bite-sized training materials. Not that we should all be looking on the lookout like, oh, is this a bad situation? But we should know the range of them and how do we know when it's getting bad so that we can quickly take action sooner. So I have a training on that as well called Navigating Sticky Workplace Situations.
Wow, thank you for the important work that you're doing. I'm so curious to hear a little bit more about what are the common patterns that you've observed. I'm sure the women came from different kinds of adversity, personal, professional.
Yeah.
Do you see a common thread in them?
Yeah, I think the thing about these sticky workplace situations is that it's a little bit shameful to talk about. I mean, it's unlike, let's say, a death or illness in the family, because it's like, oh, maybe something is wrong with you, right? So that's why a lot of them, they don't want to talk about it to their family or their immediate professional circle, because it might impact their professional reputation going forward. And we found out that's why they all came to sign up for this group of women who said we wanted to help, right? Because they were like 3 or 4 degrees removed from us. So it wouldn't be like we can know too much about them in the future, right?
Can you just give us a sense of the kind of situations that people were experiencing?
Yeah, definitely. So on one end, you'll find like more acute targeted situations where there's a pattern of behavior that suggests that women are being excluded in this environment. We had a very senior woman in a real estate firm, but despite people commenting on it, even the employee engagement survey showing this is a problem, this guy was constantly promoted. And then all of a sudden, HR goes around saying, we want to talk to all the women about what's happening. And she's one of the only women in the team. She said, if I'm really transparent, I really fear retaliation because this company is not taking any of the feedback we've given seriously before, right? So that's a situation where, yeah, her job might be at risk, right? Like you're asking her about what is she going to say, right? Or, often women come into a company and they start to see a puzzling shift in their manager's behavior, right? Like portfolios get taken away, or even one of them wanted to make a transfer within the company. And when the manager found out, he just removed her from all the chat groups, removed her, took away her team, and then told the rest of the senior management she doesn't want to stay in this company anymore, which was not true. She wanted to move team, right? So these are acute situations where, yeah, somebody really doesn't want you around, right? And you need to play a bit more defensive. Then there are more chronic, what we call slow burn situations where it's not necessarily targeted, but there's some fundamental mismatch and it's widening, whether it's your values of the company, your progression, your promotion prospects, because something about you just is not valued in the company. And yes, it can come down to race and age sometimes and gender, but we are not into diagnosing it. We are in helping you kind of have a gut check on, okay, this is really the situation. What do you want to do, right, going forward with this? So, but the difference with the latter is that you just have a longer time to respond. Whereas the former situations where it's targeted and acute and sensitive and very urgent, and we tend to pull all the community resources to help you know what your range of options are, right? Even what lawyers you might need to talk to at this point. But having said that, let's not think about workplace adversity too extremely, because all of us have been in hard situations where we're blindsided, and that can have a profound impact on our identity and what we think about ourselves. Of course, it's a job and the practical stuff, but unfortunately, what I see with women is when they go through these situations, it's just horrible for their self-esteem and self-worth, because so many of us put so much of our blood, sweat, and tears into our work that when we are rewarded in this way, it takes a blow to their identity. So that's common across all these women. It's the identity and the sense of powerlessness in the situation, despite the fact that they're extremely capable in normal circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really insightful. At the end of the day, it's impacting how we see ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can have very long-term impact. So a third archetype of women we serve were they were not in a situation anymore, maybe like 3 months, 6 months, even a year out, and they were like, I haven't regained my confidence. There's so much shame attached to going through these things, right? Like being unfairly terminated, being, pushed off what they call a glass cliff, when they promote women to a certain level to take over a problematic team. And we serve mainly women who are in that senior and rising category. Yeah.
These women don't sound like they are short of, resources in a financial sense, or even like assessing therapy or looking for a lawyer. What is it that prevents, and how does the work that you do with them get them out of that helpless situation?
That's a really, really, actually very, very good point. I would best describe it as you need a first responder. So if, you're in code red, how I would notice this in a woman is not by judging the situation, but by looking at her, right? Like if she's very normally has a high executive function, very decisive, suddenly she just perpetually feels stuck. She's perpetually talking about this problem. If she has a partner, the partner's like, okay, just quit that job already. She's like, it's not so simple. But she's like, energy is low. They're starting not to sleep, not to eat properly. When you're in that situation, you'll be like, who can actually help me? With lawyers, they often don't know. They often have these misconceptions that lawyers are just for exploding a situation and like making a demand letter. With therapists, often it's like, I don't know, it's hit or miss, right? What we found is that for a first responder, a woman who looks like me, who has been through something like me, can immediately provide the empathy that makes you feel safe, the credibility that she knows a thing or two about how to practically help you. You cannot just be emotional. You have to be like step one, step two, step three, almost decision trees to help them. That's why we've developed this whole menu of options and categories and worksheets that women can then select as well, right? Because you're not the first person and you won't be the last person to have been through something like that. Yeah.
I am beginning to kind of see this as almost like a crisis center of sort, where it's not quite, legal work per se, or coach, kind of therapy per se, but it's somewhere in the middle, right? Where you have the personal empathy piece, and then providing useful tools and resources.
It's a lot more practical than coaching. Coaching tends to be more of a ask you questions, and that's a very useful process when you have time. But if you're in a more urgent situation where you're already kind of close to the edge, kind
Yeah.
of pull you back first and then launch you in the right direction. Um,
Yeah, thanks for giving just that description. I think it's definitely very needed. Yeah, I mean, I've been in situations at work as well where I guess I didn't really, I just Googled, right? Like, this just happened, is this normal? Like, yeah, to looking for lawyers. So I can see how something like your resource would be really helpful, like a live person to talk to what you're going through, and having like, hundreds of case studies to reference.
yeah, I think sometimes we just need that gut check, and as a community, we should be able to provide it to each other, but we have to get over that shame of being like, I'm in this situation, and the trust barrier, right? Yeah. We don't want people to also just tell us, oh, you're 100% right. That's not what we want either. We also want honest opinion, right? But first you need to trust. First you need to really understand the person's credibility.
I want to bring this back a little bit to the lens of a working mom, someone
Yeah.
who, and perhaps someone still in the first 8 years of becoming a mom, and it's a very tiring season. A lot of things change in us. What have you seen from your coaching, the work that you do with Inherent, that can be helpful for us to understand why we're going through all this and what to do with it?
Yeah. I think you alluded to it already. It's just this season where there's a ton of external things shifting around us, right? Children, demands, we're getting more senior at work, but internally things are also shifting, right? And how do you have a compass for moving forward? I think one important thing for me is I realized like life just happens in seasons, in 3-year seasons, 5-year seasons, and I can just make my decision for this season. There's a very Singaporean fear of doors closing, and what if you can't go back through that door? But I will give you some good news because I coach all these female leaders, and many of them have actually taken really long career breaks, and they're CEOs now of tech companies. And it turns out that they are happier CEOs than most of the other CEOs I've met because they've done some of this. They've detached their identity from their work, right? The act of saying, I'm going to take those 3 years off. I don't know where I might land after, but this is definitely more important to me than whatever it is. The act of doing that has made them a lot more convicted in their lives, right? And so when I see them, they're actually making bolder choices, going against the grain, actually doing very well at their work and being very unaffected by some of the of the swings that you see maybe younger founders go through. So I would say that's very encouraging because we're always afraid that this is a permanent decision when I decide to take a back seat. But we're seeing more and more women are coming back, making comeback. One of them, 12 years off, okay, and didn't work a day in those 12 years really. But if you ask me what are the ingredients, if you want to consider a career break, number one, of course, your strong professional reputation before, keeping in touch with the people who you have worked with, being very clear with them what you can offer them in this season. So I've had women, you trace their career paths, they're CEOs now, but they did more menial, less demanding things for good people in the years where they could only give 3-4 hours a day, right? But that set them up to still be in the game, right? And if you're capable, people are going to recognize that. And I see that just so much now that it makes me encouraged. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think we sometimes, I don't know whether it's a function of being where I am, in Singapore or Asia versus being in the West, but there's just not enough of these like role models, I suppose, that we see and find encouragement and inspiration from, you know what I mean? Which is also one of the reasons why I have this podcast, to kind of share these alternative paths, right? To truly make it work, especially for the still, ambitious woman who now just has competing priorities and has to decide for herself where that goes. So thank you for sharing that. I'm very encouraged.
There are Asian women in this pool, Singaporean women included in my coaching pool. So I see across the world, and this is if you are capable, people are going to want you. If you're stable, people are going to want you. If you look at the tech and hiring landscape in general, then there's this idea of the flawless leader who kind of like charges ahead and achieves this hyper growth. And I think some of that is falling apart, right? Like we're really looking for steady hands. And like what more steady hands than people who have like raised family, right? Like made hard choices in their lives and stood by them. And that's moms for you. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's just gold. Thank you so much, Karen. Well, as we close out here, what is, one message that you have for our listeners?
Yeah, if you're feeling like life is very, very messy, it's not you. It's that life is very, very messy. And one thing that I've learned is, okay, I'm not the only one who has to figure this out, and I'm going to figure it out, right? Like, it's not that I'm particularly bad or particularly indecisive. These are just phases to walk through. And every single, for example, leader that I have coached, you know, they struggle deeply. And there's this quote about it's not the critic who counts, it's the one who like gets in the ring and gets like, you know, fails to get it again, right? And I think that's so many of us. We have this idea of wanting to have the perfect narrative and trajectory, and frankly, that's what social media feeds us. Like, oh no, I made this choice and I'm all good. But that's not true. Like all of us are struggling through something or other at every point. And it's not about the absence of mess. I think it's in the mess you feel like you have the support to hold you up as you work through it, right? And that's something that I definitely have learned in my last few years.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was full of wisdom and so many nuggets. Wishing all the best with this important work they are doing with Inherent.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for listening to Make It Work, where we uncover inspiring stories of modern working mamas in Asia who have redefined their careers whilst putting family first. Please help others discover the show by leaving a review and rating on wherever you get your podcast. Don't forget to follow us on our Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Meanwhile, here's to you, making it work.